Hello guys, the following text I will read is an extract of the book The Road to Mecca, which was written by Muhammed Asad, aka Leopold Weiss. In this part we will get to know about his impressions after reading the Quran. One Friday I went with my friend and host into the Umayyad Mosque. The many marble columns which supported the domed ceiling shone under the sun rays that fell through the lintel windows. There was a scent of musk in the air. Red and blue carpets covered the floor. In long even rows stood many hundreds of men behind the Imam who led the prayer. They bowed, kneeled, touched the ground with their foreheads, and rose again, all in disciplined unison, like soldiers. It was very quiet while the congregation was standing. One could hear the voice of the old Imam from the distant depth of the huge hall, reciting verses from the Quran. And when he bowed or prostrated himself, the entire congregation followed him as one man, bowing and prostrating themselves before God as if he were present before their eyes. It was at this moment that I became aware how near their God and faith were to these people. Their prayer did not seem to be divorced from their working day. It was part of it, not meant to help them forget life, but to remember it better by remembering God. How strange and wonderful, I said to my friend as we were leaving the mosque, that you people feel God to be so close to you. I wish I could feel so myself. How else could it be, O my brother? Is not God, as our holy book says, nearer to thee than the vein in thy neck? Spurred by my new awareness, I spent much of my time at Damascus, reading all manner of books on Islam on which I could lay my hands. My Arabic, although sufficient for the purposes of conversation, was as yet too weak for reading the Quran in original, and so I had to take recourse to two translations, one French and the other German, which I borrowed from a library. For the rest I had to rely on European Orientalist works and on my friend's explanations. However fragmentary, these studies and talks were like the lifting of a curtain. I began to discern a world of ideas which hitherto I had been entirely ignorant. Islam did not seem to be so much a religion in the popular sense of the word as rather a way of life, not so much a system of theology as a program of personal and social behavior based on the consciousness of God. Nowhere in the Quran could I find any reference to a need for salvation. No original inherited sin stood between the individual and his destiny, for nothing shall be attributed to man but what he himself has striven for. No asceticism was required to open a hidden gate to purity, for purity was man's birthright, and sin meant no more than a lapse from the innate positive qualities with which God was said to have endowed every human being. There was no trace of any dualism in the consideration of man's nature. Body and soul seemed to be taken as one integral whole. At first I was somewhat startled by the Quran's concern not only with matters spiritual, but also with many seemingly trivial mundane aspects of life. But in time I began to understand that if man were indeed in integral unity of body and soul, as Islam insisted he was, no aspect of his life could be too trivial to come within the purview of religion. With all this, the Quran never let its followers forget that the life of this world was only one stage of man's way to a higher existence, and that his ultimate goal was of spiritual nature. Material prosperity, it said, is desirable, but not an end in itself, and therefore man's appetites, though justified in themselves, must be restrained and controlled by moral consciousness. This consciousness ought to relate not merely to man's relation with God, but also to his relations with men, not only to the spiritual perfection of the individual, but also to the creation of such social conditions as might be conducive to the spiritual development of all, so that all might live in fullness. All this was intellectually and ethically far more respectable than anything I had previously heard or read about Islam. Its approach to the problems of the spirit seemed to be deeper than that of the Old Testament, and had, moreover, none of the latter's predilection for one particular nation, and its approach to the problems of the flesh was, unlike the New Testament, strongly affirmative. Spirit and flesh stood each in its own right as the twin aspects of man's God-created life. Was not perhaps this teaching, I asked myself, responsible for the emotional security I had so long sensed in the Arabs?